This video was sponsored by Dashlane.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage, the Cowardly Dog. But creepy stuff happens in nowhere. It's up to Courage to save his new home.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
When we think of shows that were made in the early 2000s, you can't ignore Courage the Cowardly Dog. With 52 episodes across 4 seasons and 3 years, it cemented itself as a fantastic Cartoon Network show that pushed the boundaries for what is dark, surreal, bizarre, and disturbing when it comes to television children's animation. So, what happened? Well, we're not there yet.
Oh, the school. I attended the School of Visual Arts in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
It was there as the first time I saw animation and immediately fell in love with it.
John R. Dilworth was born on February 14th, 1963. Little did he know he'd be responsible for one of the most beloved horror cartoons of the new millennium.
What was your childhood like?
What was my childhood like? Well, I grew up on a farm, very much like the one depicted in Courage.
What was school like for you as a child?
Well, school was great. It was just fantastic because I was really taught about the land and mostly how to grow things. And in Courage, I make a bit of fun about that. With the farmer, because he's unable to grow anything. His farm is barren.
Based off of multiple interviews, it's pretty clear to see that while living a farm life, his imagination blossomed and was expressed through the art that he would make. Growing up, he'd be influenced by many well-known creators such as Bob Clampett, animator, producer, and director best known for his work on Looney Tunes, particularly the work involving Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, and Tweety. Tex Avery, who many consider to be one of the most significant animators of our time, crucial in the success of Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, among a multitude of others, alongside the works of Cezanne and Van Gogh.
My brother and I have been watching, my whole family have been watching the cartoons from the golden age of Hollywood cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And the most irrational of that bunch for me was Bob Clampett and Tex Avery. And, I admired a few others as well, but that was amazing, that elasticity and the absurdity of behavior.
He listened to all kinds of music, everything from classical to rap to jazz. Here's a quote from the November 1999 issue of the Animation World magazine. "I don't believe you can be narrow culturally or intellectually when you're creating cartoons. If you look at the old classics from the 40s, from anybody, it's loaded with culture and references to things that people have experienced, to music and sound effects, to even writing gags, social commentary, parody. Those were people that are very, very aware. They didn't put out gags superficially," he says.
How did you get into animation, even during your youth?
Well, it all started with a pencil, John. Pencil. I think it was a number 2. Beware. You ever see a pencil and you take it up, it's going to be with you till the grave, I'm certain. I think it's just the illusion. Yeah. Illusion of the sparkly stuff that we had been programmed to believe in. All that wonderful flickering on the big screen, and the glamour, and the horror, and the screaming, and the flashing eyes without pupils, and the knives, and the fangs, and the little girls screaming, and the strangling, and monsters with nails out of their heads.
He started animating at New York School of Visual Arts, but took it upon himself to teach himself the things that weren't necessarily taught at college. Based off of his personal experiences, he felt like he had a strong intuitive ability and would determine that he needed to take bold actions in order to improve his creativity, investing time in learning everything from the history of dance, life drawings, playwriting, and even then history.
Well, this is craft, John. This is just boilerplate craft. Often you would want to symbolize a personality by their form. And the evidence for this is over 100 years old. So I haven't been doing anything new. let's say. Nothing avant-garde or particularly modern. I'm just continuing a design language, again, that's over 100 years old.
He'd graduate with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1985, working on one of his first films according to his public filmography, Pierre, a student film. And in this, we can see a lot of the early style that Dilworth would bring over to Courage. Everything from long drawn-out reactions to a piano composition choice, composed by the musician Philip Martorell, and an ever so evolving score that gets dissonant when things go wrong. According to him, he would always try to keep things busy and occupied within his films. Whether it was working on a psychodrama, The Limited Bird in 1989, which was his first independent work, his next film, When Lily Laney Moved In 1991, or working as an in-betweener / cell painter for Doug. To him, he wanted to be a constant student of his craft and always felt like he was years behind where he thought he should be. He'd also be inspired a lot from horror and sci-fi, despite consuming a lot of comedy from animation growing up.
Yeah, sure. I love horror. Love horror and sci-fi. I mean, my brother and I, we would get tremendous satisfaction and glee from plotting to scare our mother in any possible way. She was such an easy target. And of course we loved her and all, we didn't want her to have a heart attack, but there's something just amazing to pop out behind a sofa in a dark room just as somebody's coming home from work.
And you know what's truly scary? During the production of this Rise and Fall, I nearly lost access to an account I needed, and without my password manager, I wouldn't have been able to access that account for a long time, and the production for this video would have been pushed back. So special thanks to today's sponsor, Dashlane. We all need strong passwords in today's world, and Dashlane allows for secure storage of different passwords, credit cards, and other secure information that's as easy to retrieve for you as one click for any device you own. In addition, if you can't create your own combination of uppercase and lowercase letters alongside numbers and symbols for some odd reason, Dashlane provides complex password generation, which will make it harder for other people to access your account. What I enjoy about Dashlane is their personal VPN and dark web monitoring. They'll also give you quick notifications should you ever be breached. So instead of remembering every password you have or writing it down physically for everyone to see, or even more scary, using the same password for everything and pretending it was a hack, support the channel and try Dashlane for free on your first device by heading over to www.dashlane.com/alphaj. And then when you want to upgrade to premium, use my code ALPHAJ for 10% off. And if for some reason your password is AlphaGay, pause the video. Go change it, please. So it's time we get over to that pilot for a certain network, but not the one you're thinking of. In association with Jumbo Pictures, he'd produce Psyched for Snoopa, a Nickelodeon pilot, which moved away from the super artsy horror and unpolished work that he'd be creating up to this point, and center in on formalizing his theories on color and design. Here we see a very polished piece that explores a very cartoony and energetic pair, giving their babysitter and friends a tough time. While nothing groundbreaking, it does show that he can help in creating a solid, professional piece of media. However, it was this short that he'd helped make in 1993 that really becomes important towards Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Starring Raisin! She's hot, baby, real hot, just the way she likes it. And her brother, Malcolm, the malcontent.
Yeah, right.
Also starring Raisin's orphan dog, Hamilton.
Does this dog seem familiar? Well, it should, because with some refining, this dog would become the center of one of Cartoon Network's most popular shows. He doesn't talk much within the short, as it leans towards the two main characters, Raisin and Malcolm. However, like with Courage, this short can get pretty disturbing, like when Malcolm trails off into just downright spewing hate. For example, there's a scene towards the beginning where right before Hamilton pulls something out of his hat, Malcolm randomly brings up the fact that Hamilton has no parents.
Yeah, right. Watch him pull out squat. Why don't you pull out your parents? Mommy! Mommy! Where's my mommy?
To go from something so polished and kid-friendly to something so brash, sloppy, and dark, shows his range as far as creating animation for whichever audience he wishes to target. His kid-friendly stuff never steers into being too much, so far, and his adult stuff does not have a filter, and can easily be as vulgar as the vulgar cartoons that we know today. Also, like with Courage, you can make the case that Hamilton is an orphan dog, so with all of these movies that he funded, it'd be the next one that really took off, and believe it or not, it was about a pretty dirty bird. This would be a project that Dilworth spent a lot of time studying and trying to get right with timing and the execution. On the surface level, it's pretty silly. With your typical character A annoys character B, it employs a lot of different things that I wouldn't see in his previous work, such as a moving sky, having tons of different and wacky expressions, and having real-life imagery integrated so smoothly. I think this strikes the perfect balance between his dark and disturbing stuff, and also his lighthearted and wacky work as well, especially when you see towards the middle. You see that and you understand why he acts that way, justified or not. It's a brilliant short that won tons of awards. With this portfolio building up, and with award-winning and diverse work, it'd be only a matter of time before a network committed to him with a long-term project.
And now, it's time for the Moxie Show!
Hi, I'm Moxie, and, that's Fleet, and,
Think you better dance now!
November 26, 1993. After relying on a backlog of older animation since its premiere a year ago, October 1st, 1992, Cartoon Network would release The Moxie Show, a computer-animated anthology series, which also served as the first original series on Cartoon Network. Space Ghost Coast to Coast would premiere not too soon after, in 1994. While the show gathered an older audience that appreciated its minimal and counterculture identity, neither show would secure Cartoon Network's spot as one of the premier television animation networks. Meanwhile, Hanna-Barbera, a once world-renowned animation studio responsible for the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo among others, was up for sale and bought by the Turner Broadcasting System, the same company that would be working alongside Cartoon Network. As Nickelodeon was going through a golden age, turning a struggling net loss performance around 1984 into getting its best ratings via the help of Alan Goodman and Fred Seibert, the latter went on to become the last president of Hanna-Barbera and would be approached to come up with an idea to make the network blossom. I had never really done anything in cartoons. I was just really a neophyte and interested media person, but I knew about the way the Looney Tunes theatrical cartoons have been made. I said, it seems to me that what they did was make a 6-minute cartoon, run it before a movie, and if people liked it, they made another one, featuring the same character. If they didn't like it, they stopped making it. Why don't we do a system like that, where we make these little containable things?
Join us next time for 3 Cartoons! But what a cartoon show!
Seibert would explore this topic deeply in an Animation World magazine article. Paraphrasing, he mentions that he enjoyed the idea of having all of the processes working under one roof, with a disciplined schedule and a controlled and presentable output. Whereas many of the Nickelodeon pilots he claimed back in the day were unairable due to how messy it was, he wanted to invest time, effort, and money into creating things that he can use to recoup the value put into it. In the mid-80s, before I went to Hanna-Barbera, both Disney and Warner Brothers got into the television animation business by rating the company, and they rated the cream. All the people left at Hanna-Barbera thought they were the cream, but that wasn't the case. So here I am, I know that no first level creative person would ever come to Hanna-Barbera, and I knew I needed a system to attract them, and where I can try out as many as possible and figure out who had the goods and who didn't. Everyone around Seibert seemed very skeptical of Hanna-Barbera, considering that it lost its market share to other companies, and haven't had a hit since the Smurfs. Warner Bros. Was only using Hanna-Barbera for its library, which to Fred, he understood initially. The intent was that if the network had a great library, then why make original programming? However, he soon learned that as a new network, cable operators and advertisers respect original programming, but not library. I actually don't have many talents, but I'm a good analyst, and I never do anything unless I know why I'm doing it. If I fail, it's because I didn't know why I was doing it to begin with. I said, why do you want to do original series? Now I knew where I was going with this, but they didn't. They said because that's what you do on television. I said, let's look at it. If it's about publicity, when are we going to get publicity on an original series? The day we announce we're doing one, the week we launch, we'll get some. Maybe if we were on for years and we're a phenomenon, we'll get some more. I had just made 2 series, Two Stupid Dogs and SWAT Cats for 10 million bucks, and they failed within a week. So we're gonna do all of this stuff to get these 2 publicity hits, spend all of this money and fail, because in showbiz, that's the odds. I said, I have an idea of how we can get publicity for 48 weeks, every single week, for almost 2 years. They said, really? I said, yeah, let's make a new show every week, but I can do it for 10 million. How do you do that? Let's make it like Looney Tunes.
The What a Cartoon Show! Now you can see 3 Cartoon Network originals in one show! A triple dip and power half hour of contemporary cartoon classics! From us to you! On the What a Cartoon Show! Sunday at 6 on the World Cartoon Headquarters, Cartoon Network!
48 shorts were produced, all with different characters, different creators, spanning from 1995 to 1997, with millions of dollars on the line. Each short mirrored the structure of a theatrical cartoon, with the staff being anyone who wanted to pitch an idea. According to Fred, some 5,000 people flocked to Hanna-Barbera to pitch ideas. We'd have first-timers Craig McCracken, Gennady Tarkovsky, Butch Hartman, Rob Renzetti, Seth MacFarlane, and John R. Dilworth pitch and produce shorts alongside veteran creators such as Ralph Bosky, William Hanna, and Joseph Barbera, among many, many more. A lot was on the line, considering how new Cartoon Network was alongside the giants Disney and Nickelodeon. The Tune-In was simulcasted on Cartoon Network, TBS Superstation, and TNT. The first short broadcasted would be about 3 kindergartners who fly off to save the mayor, who is being turned into a steak by a villain who has invented a gun that transforms everything into meat.
It's very becoming.
The project was a massive success, leading into being the origin of many soon-to-be popular series, including Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, and Family Guy. As the events went on, we get to the 25th short, called The Chicken from Outer Space, which features a dog trying to stop alien chickens from taking over the Earth while at his owner's farm. We start off in the middle of nowhere with the primitive Courage, Muriel, and Eustace relaxing for breakfast, as the show establishes that this pink dog, Courage, is, as it says on the tin, a cowardly dog, being super afraid of a small mouse. Eustace not changing much from his pilot simply scares Courage away. You'll notice that this short is really bright for being a part of the Courage the Cowardly Dog series. Unlike Hamilton, Courage seems a lot more refined and easier to look at. While this doesn't mean that the pilot is super polished, this is the first time Courage can at least be distinguished well. The short doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it, instead relying on tons of visual cues to create movement within the short. As the pilot is titled, there's a chicken that comes from outer space who wants to take over Earth via infecting the chicken farm and laying its own eggs. Fun fact, the chicken from outer space was inspired by Nick Park's penguin from Wallace and Gromit's The Wrong Trousers. We see a lot of things that become refined and polished, but also crucial to the style of Courage. There's a lot of effort put in to create the necessary reactions of Courage, alongside a dynamic of Muriel, Eustace, and Courage. We also see Courage's signature use of becoming the things that he portrays in order to visually execute the idea better.
Help! Help! Help!
However, in Boy Who Cried Wolf's fashion, the alien is nowhere to be found once Courage is outside with help. Like with the series going forward, the stick is that while Eustace and Muriel see very little of what Courage sees, Muriel never takes that out on Courage, but rather gets Eustace if he is too mean to Courage. It's a balancing act that would take Cartoon Network by storm. Courage finds the alien chicken taking out the other chickens, and indirectly offering Muriel alien eggs, which are distinctly identified, but Muriel doesn't see anything suspicious about them. Like in The Dirty Bird, a lot of Dilworth's style comes from having multiple characters doing things but not knowing of certain things, thus leading to chaos. Like here, where there's this dynamic of Courage knowing what's up, Muriel none the wiser, and the alien chicken understanding that the dog is privy to his evil plans. It's the cornerstone of Courage basically, and is done very well here. Unfortunately, Courage gets locked up in a chicken coop, helpless to what is gonna go on for now. The music here is also very well put together, and a highlight of so is towards the tension of seeing Muriel cook with the alien eggs, thus having this very tense and suspenseful score attached. The surface layer of this is a dog just trying to save his family. However, the sub-layer here, the layer that would attract a more diverse audience, is that this is not trying to be lighthearted about any of this. We'd see Eustace start to mutate and attempt to convert Muriel alongside him. And I think having a lack of a squeaky clean outlook here allowed for this show to stand out amongst the crowd that wanted something a bit darker, but still belonged on Cartoon Network because it retained a lot of cartoonish aspects, such as Courage and the chicken battling it out in various wacky competitions. As the chicken would go on to lose competitions, he'd also try to take out Courage with a cheap space shot, which led to his demise. Courage would also end up taking this gun and killing Eustace with it. Wow, business as usual, eh? Good thing this isn't canon, or else the show would have been a lot different. The show does end with the reaffirmation of Courage being a cowardly dog, but also the one who ends up saving him, and also getting his one line in the pilot.
This shouldn't happen to a dog. Ouch!
Cartoon Network loved the series and thought that it had massive potential. The short was also nominated at the Academy Awards for Best Animated Short Film, with Cartoon Network forming slowly, taking on the likes of Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, the Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy, among others. Courage the Cowardly Dog joined in as the 8th original series, placed in order to cement Cartoon Network's place as a legitimate competitor in the animation industry. And this is the rise and fall of Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Oh yeah, it's easy to be brave when your enemy is made in Taiwan. But what happens when they come a little weirder?
Courage the Cowardly Dog, a brand new series, tonight at 10:30 on Cartoon Network.
Shake, Courage, shake.
November 12th, 1999. People across the nation tuned in to Cartoon Network's latest offering, A Cowardly Dog, his aloof but simple farm folk owners, and an array of horror, starting with The Night at the Cat's Motel. The trio was on their way home from vacation that apparently was crummy according to Eustace. We see a very different version of the pilot with the more polished Courage, more words being spoken, and Courage having a different voice, the voice that many of us have become accustomed to. In this motel lies Katz, a calm monotone fellow who allows no dogs in his motel, which leads to Courage being tied outside. We definitely see a difference in the music composition, as this one has a strong direction tied to the general mood of the scene, or a particular genre associated with the character, like so.
Welcome to the Cat's Motel. I'm Katz.
The episode would also do things such as empathize onomatopoeia via actually using the word associated with the sound effect. Dynamic-wise, not much changes between them. Eustace still loves to scare Courage and shows a distant relationship towards him. Muriel bashes Eustace with whatever she's holding, and Courage is still afraid of anything that moves. If anything, they take greater liberty in allowing Courage to speak in actual sentences.
Oh, Courage, don't worry. It's only for a short time. Good night, Courage.
It may be a good night for you. You'll be in a warm bed.
Alongside a tiny reference to the chicken from outer space in the next shot, we start to see that this motel isn't like your average motels. Or maybe it is because many aren't exactly that great, but the point is, Katz has pet spiders that he decides to release in order to feast on Courage while he's alive. While Courage is away, we get to see certain sides of the characters even though it's for a brief period, as this is a very Courage-centric episode. Eustace is very grouchy. However, he's shown to want Muriel to notice what he says and what he does, so it makes for a very interesting duo. Muriel is very optimistic in this episode, and even during times of danger, she's shown to worry and panic about the problem but not take it out on Courage at any time. Especially in this episode, where Courage would end up failing to get Muriel help in time. Often seen in horror-related media, they also spend a lot of time showing you the gross and uncomfortable stuff, like having the spider's face up and close in the camera so that you cannot ignore it, with its mouth oozing. I also enjoy the wall patterns here. It really gives this feeling of being in a very rinky down place. Let's highlight the music more, however. Courage, the show, loves to play with tension, as the horror genre is known for doing, and one of those aspects is to show the danger, then show Courage's reaction, with an underlying element of correctly placed music. Generally, with this basic structure, you're able to capture the fear or dread one may feel if they were also in the situation. The piano playing random notes over a dissonant note being played by an instrument in the string family really sets the tone, as the piano playing a lot of different notes, most likely chromatically, symbolizes the spider's fidgety motion, at least to us humans watching. It's just these 8 legs jutting out and moving frantically, creating this natural sense of terror. It most likely can bring us back to an experience where we've seen this, as horror can play off of our own experience with something tangential. Also, with more of the close-up shots, you can see it how Courage would see it. We also get to see sort of the cartoony sequence we saw in the pilot, in which Courage tries a selection of exaggerated ways to get out of a place or to fix his current dilemma. I love these moments within the show, because it retains this as a cartoon for Cartoon Network. As to me, it builds this culture that at its core, these are still cartoons that want to entertain and never want to get too realistic. While Courage would get out of this situation, he'd have to rescue both Muriel and Eustace, who while in deep sleep, nearly gets eaten by spiders. We see a lot more of the cartoonish antics when Courage is trying to wake up Eustace, or when he's trying to get into the hotel room. And I really think having these comedic moments makes sure that this doesn't get too serious, as he's still a cowardly dog, and wouldn't exactly be able to brute force this problem away. Also, like the pilot, we retain Courage explaining himself, using himself as a visual representation of what he's trying to communicate, when Courage turns to Katz for help. However, he'd soon learn that Katz is up to no good. He'd find Eustace bundled up for a spider to eat, and this is when Courage would confront Katz for the first time. We'd learn more about Katz later on, but you can see, even when showing his true side, he's very collected and calm, and I feel like his personality is really driven by his particular voice actor's performance.
Leaving so soon?
This would be later exemplified better when Courage is running down a hallway, panicking, screaming, waving his hands in the air and all that, and all of that is contrasted against Katz's calm walk. I love how the hallway is curved and distorted to give that warped feel amongst the cracks in the floor, and the general dirty feel that the motel has with the dimly lit ambience. Another part of the pilot that they kept in was the cartoony way Courage may battle some of his biggest enemies. Like here, it's racquetball, and I really enjoy how it was initiated.
A little sport before dying, dear boy.
Do I have a choice?
We see a lot of anomalies here, such as Katz being invested in arachnids, Courage not saving Muriel, but Muriel saving herself, and Muriel saving Courage in the end. You can tell that they were still trying to figure out the general progression of the show and the dynamics. Generally, shows both visually and functionally become a lot more refined as you go throughout the first season. But as Courage episodes generally end, it ends with a good feeling as they escaped while they can. The enemy was taken down, and we can say for sure that they are safe, at least for now. Courage would go on to become one of the highest rated programs in its first few years, behind Dexter, but in front of Tom and Jerry, the Powerpuff Girls, and I Am Weasel. During the rating period of November 1999 alone, Courage the Cowardly Dog became the highest rated premiere in Cartoon Network history at the time. Cartoon Network tied as the 4th highest cable network on that night. It was clear that they had a hit on their hands, that people wanted to see more of. So, let's get on with The Rise. Located in the middle of nowhere, a fictional city, lies the creation of a trio and their misadventures throughout this barren land. When approached about the idea of Nowhere and its connection to an actual city in Kansas, the creator had this to say: "I had no idea that a town with the same name existed. I wanted to portray a pseudo-village, a reverie and melancholia of places in America that proved no longer an economic imperative. It's actually this barren land that bears the theory that all of the villains within Courage are figments of his wild and yet limited imagination. I don't buy said theory, but alongside not knowing what outside truly looks like, I can see why such a theory would gain traction. The main characters would be 3, as that's a heavily used setup for many of John's films. He feels as though it's a cultural number, representing both the secular and divine, the single child of a working class family, and a geometry involving the pyramid. Like with Smart Talk with Raisin, this trio would consist of the higher intelligent female character that is slightly strange, the unsympathetic male character, and the innocent character. He wanted the show to revolve around helping people, saving people, sacrifices, and romance for the safety of others. Which is why the show revolves around Courage for the most part, saving the people around him. Dilworth would state in another interview that he didn't necessarily watch his own show or other shows on at the time, and would state that he wished that he did. His inspiration mainly took from the classics of visual art, to the classics of horror, to the classics of animation. If you notice, there aren't a lot of camera wipes, pans, dissolves, and general movement within the show. This was an intentional choice that Dilworth would expand later on. Because there are no camera moves in life, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. If I don't feel the need for it, then I won't put it in. I'm certainly not going to put it in just to remind the viewer that they're being manipulated. In the series, things are happening so quickly, the suspense doesn't require a lot of camera moves or fades. What it requires is a lot of images thrown at you so that you decipher them immediately and then you move on. There's also a no gore rule agreed upon the creator and the network. As far as the writing aspect went, it was suggested to think narratively, be flexible, and keep compassion in mind. The one thing I learned beyond anything else is greater tolerance and patience with others. Period. That's it. I don't think there's any way on God's earth that you're going to accomplish anything where you don't get along with everyone. And that in and of itself is an art. That requires you to put aside your ego, any kind of judgments, and personal belief systems that you have, and consider people's personalities or their performance or their attitudes. The most important thing is that you get the project done, and you have to have some semblance of a good time. He'd consider himself to write about 90% of the episode before taking it to his team, who generally speak about what the episode will be about, as it's assembled by a head writer. The show would never get too dark, and surprisingly would be known for having cartoonish battles with villains, such as in the first episode with Cats, whom he'd admit to being one of his favorite villains, which explains why he was used a lot more than other villains. He'd also use the word of a sound within it being heard for emphasis. He'd elaborate on this in a blog saying, "Visual sound effects are part of my vocabulary of animation as the grin or irrational reaction. I am also aware of how elements from different studies can complement one another and add a bit of variety to a visual language." He'd be a big fan of music, saying that it's one of his favorite parts of the process. He'd take a lot of inspiration from classical music, which can be seen in a few episodes. He'd take a great initiative to avoid using stock sound effects, and make everything as organic as he could. He'd take a lot from working with mixed media, everything from cell animation, puppets, paper cutouts, photorealistic imagery, archival video footage, and even CGI. You would see the latter very well when a CGI version of Muriel is used when Courage tries to explain it to a muted Muriel that her voice is needed to save the farm.
I'm talking now, and the sound of my voice will save the farm from getting destroyed.
He'd say in an interview, "It isn't like we're putting flat character colors on 3D backgrounds, because that's very obvious. We've adjusted the colors of the characters to fit within the world that they're existing in. That's full of textured sand, and wood, and wallpaper, and sky, so that the end result is sort of a believability level. That's really what I wanted to get across. This show would take a lot from horror. Everything from staying at a creepy motel, in A Night with Cats, a rabid werewolf, or mole in this case, in Night of the Weremole, to the cases of Bigfoot, to the creepy in-laws, to mystical curses, to mythical curses, to exploring scarecrows, twins, mummies, and even TV executives. Courage is a love letter to the horror genre, exploring it at its most accessible level in a format that kids can grow up and enjoy. It set the tone for horror Cartoon Network original shows, and date other shows that incorporated horror, such as Invader Zim, Grim and Evil, and The Mummy, among other Monster of the Week / horror shows. It is all of these three elements, plus more, that went into Courage. However, let's focus on the main three characters.
Oh, my poor thing. Out here all alone? What courage you have. Would you like to come home with me? I'll call you Courage. We'll have a grand time.
Ripped away from his family lied a mutt who'd end up being the glue that holds a stubborn old rural couple together. The once hard to look at mute character from Smart Talk with Raisin has been refined, given a fresh coat of paint, and was described as the quote, emotionally sensitive deliverer. Courage as a character went through multiple iterations throughout his refinement process, with over 350 auditions issued to play Courage. The creator himself even had troubles conveying his vision for Courage with the vocal directors, and had Marty perform the role through trial and error.
What's the matter with you, dog? Open! Don't open that! Stupid dog!
It's fairly easy to assume that his character is just scared all the time, and that the show is just filled with them screaming. While being scared and screaming is a big part of his character, the show knew when to use it, and when to reel it back and try other emotions and reactions. In season 1, he was shown to speak a lot more than in later seasons, and even have a catchphrase.
Oh, I just know something bad is going to happen, or my name is Archibald. And it's not. There was something on the other end of that pie, or my name's Aloysius. And it's not.
Reading a quote from an interview blog with the creator, it states, "If you see the first half of season 1, Courage does a lot more talking than in the whole series, and it was really the Cartoon Network that encouraged me to not have the dog talk. We've limited his talking to screams, babbling, and whines. And it works. That was a great call. I couldn't help but agree that it was better. These are no ordinary executives at Cartoon Network. You know, I worked with some executives that don't have a clue. These are sharp characters. They believe in the art, the cartoons."
I'll start in the basement. Things I do for love. Hey, Shadow! Are you down there?
I also agree with this decision. As well, his quips here and there can really add to a scene both comedically and story-wise. To have his character speak in multi-connected sentences would remove from the allure of his character, with him reacting more to how a dog would react, and less like a talking human portraying a dog would react. It gives off a different relationship with the viewer, who has to fill in that lack of dialogue with their own intuition and reason. Speaking of this episode in particular, The Shadow of Courage, it also shows a flaw of Courage. Sometimes he can be so eager to alert his owners about a possible threat that he doesn't even take the time to realize that said threat may go away.
This is crazy! I saw a burglar, I did!
That happens often within the series, where while Courage may see danger, his owners do not, and while it's a flaw of Courage, it is not a bad aspect of the show. Some may call this the cornerstone of the show. Courage is also known for being a very expressive character, whether it's the way that he shows fear, or the way that he personifies the things in which he wants his owners to understand his trouble. Take for example in the season 1 episode, Hothead. We see Courage figure out that the hair growth hormones that Eustace is willing to try makes him uncontrollably and explosively angry when used.
How'd you get off your leash?
I feel like this approach respects the medium of animation and the target audience, who, while would be encouraged to see fresh perspectives and original spins on stories, should also invoke the conventions of a cartoon. It also shows the show to get super creative with the way that it shows certain things, because of Courage's dialogue limitation. The other aspect Courage is well known for is the way that he'd have extended deep thoughts about the way that he imagines a villain to harm the one that he loves. They seem to be particularly Muriel focused, which makes sense with his motivations. A straightforward one can be seen in the season 2 episode, Bad Hair Day, in which the abduction of Muriel leads to Courage thinking of the many ways that she can be in trouble right now.
Muriel's in trouble!
Both the daydream sequences and the transformation into the way that he perceives threats can also be seen as cornerstones of the show, as without those aspects, the show can be very different. I think the best example that uses them both is the episode Remembrance of Courage's Past, an episode that I reviewed in detail, but in short, because of a missing dog's graphic on the back of a milk carton, Courage is sent into a 1,000-yard stare over the night, as he's in a deep state of dread. He recalls his parents and how they were maliciously abducted by an evil scientist who wanted to breed space dogs. In fact, it is this deep dark memory that led into him meeting Muriel, as shown in the beginning of this section.
Dumpling hogging dog. Human food's too good for you. Muriel, from now on it's dog food for the dog.
He's shown to have a very hot and cold relationship with a side character simply known as the computer. It's the family's desktop, located in the attic, voiced by Simon Preble, who gives this collection of zeros and ones life. With his snarky attitude, British accent, and superior outlook over what he labels the flesh kind, he offers a voice of wisdom that often is delivered in a very sarcastic and prideful way.
It was a howl at Kubrick's 2001. It's just another sort of evolution of HAL.
But as a crummy home computer like that.
Yeah, of course. Weren't those the best computers? For me, they were best computers. Those early, late 80s, early 90s computers.
He, alongside Courage, have a pretty significant episode. The season 2 episode, Mega Muriel the Magnificent. Within this episode, we see that the computer makes fun of Courage's memoirs, calling them dull, timid, and unimpressive, claiming that if he were one of the flesh kind, he'd take it to the extreme, and so he did, via Muriel's body, whether it be diving into a fault during an earthquake, being shot out of a cannon into the moon and Mars, or skiing down the side of the Empire State Building into a sewer. Soon, the computer wishes for his old life, after being nearly electrocuted in a power plant, showing the first signs of fear. He waves the entire experience off as boring, but only once Courage rescues him.
Don't worry, dog. I'm done being human. It's boring.
It's a pretty creative way to have Courage figure out the solution without the villain having to reveal it for him. He rarely overstays his welcome, nor comes across as unlikable to the point of ruining the episode. The computer even carved out its own personal fandom that was highlighted once by the Boomerang's Twitter account. He's not all snark, however, and can just bring a change of pace to a pretty straightforward episode. Take the season 3 episode, The Quilt Club, for example. In this episode, Muriel works day and night, creating fascinating designs through her sewing, and thus the episode creates a back and forth between the quilting sisters and Muriel trying her hardest into getting into a quilt club. As while she enjoys the hobby, she feels like it's a very lonely hobby to partake in. The computer brings in a much needed change of pace, providing extra context on this eerie symbol that the quilting sisters want Muriel to sew during her initiation.
The symbol is a universal sign of everlasting life, dating back to prehistoric man.
Courage is deeply compassionate at his core, but very cautious as well, as per his unfortunate upbringing. To bring up a quote from the creator in another interview blog, he states, "I wanted to show a human frailty in these villains, that they were vulnerable. Courage was often able to soften the villainous acts of these characters by being a therapist. We see this in the Shadow of Courage in a figurative sense, where he encourages said villain Shadow to stop scaring and instead pursue his dreams in show business. However, you would see this therapist aspect literally in the episode McPherson Phantom.
What?
Oh my!
To give context, in this episode, Eustace is being attacked by an invisible phantom. He pushes the blame on Muriel, which puts a strain on their relationship. Add in the fact that Eustace's mother does not like Muriel, and Muriel does not like her mother-in-law. The marriage, for a rare time in the series, is put under a stress test, in which Courage acts quick to mend any issues via a therapist format. Although it will play in the tropes that will come with seeing therapy in media, it doesn't take away from his role within the series to be the one who brings out the vulnerabilities in other people, including Eustace's mother, who explains that she is so bitter because in her long family tree, that is just how their parents treated their offspring. In a sense, because he's so willing to be vulnerable, the people around him are willing to take the steps in order to reach him, emotionally. In some cases, the monsters and villains that he comes across don't need to be attacked, or arrested, or defeated, but rather spoken to or protected. We see this in the episode Courage Meets Bigfoot, where once he does so, and Eustace brings over an angry mob, the once aggressive, massive, and loud beast becomes Courage's priority in order to protect. He's very impulsive, however, like with us, it's in his nature to be afraid of the big, scary, and the unknown. What I appreciate about the show is that it rarely pulls the wool over our eyes and tries to make us be in the seat where Courage is, determining that something needs to be attacked before pulling the cover and doing a double turn with no justification. Each and every time, Courage ends up helping what he originally saw as his enemy. They plant clues that indicate the reason of why the villain acts the way they do. For example, within the previous episode, we have a young lady that comes up to their house and say,
Please, mister, my little boy is lost. You seen my little boy? Ain't seen no lost boy.
And later within the episode, her lost boy was Bigfoot. In Son of the Chicken from Outer Space, we see this perfectly. In the beginning of the episode, it is shown that after the events of the pilot, since that particular chicken is no longer with us, his descendants have come for revenge, but communicated in a very specific way.
Go to Earth and destroy dog porridge. Or don't come home.
With this level of fear and early targeted influencing, they come across as kids who don't know what they're fighting for, rather than a three-headed menace coming down to destroy Courage. They aren't doing this because of their hatred or even vengeance towards Courage, but rather for the loyalty and love towards their mother. So during the fight, rather than Courage inadvertently doing to them what he did to their father, he's shown at the end, once getting proper context, to stage his own death, just to make it clear to the chicken's parents that the Courage threat is no more. He ended up bringing the human out of them that way. Speaking of homages, like with the Son of the Chicken from Outer Space being a callback to the pilot, I believe that there's also a callback to when Courage was viewed more as Hamilton in the episode Mondo Magic. It isn't as significant, but we do see Courage performing a similar magic trick, like in the previous animated short. However, I think the most notable example would have to be Last of the Star Makers. In this episode, we see a squid couple from space be separated by the cruelty of the vicious space food cycle. This leads into this Star Maker being the last of their kind. Initially very cautious, this squid creates a star to show that she means no harm, and merely wants to see her kids live out their egg cycle. It's in episodes like this where we see how binary Courage is when it comes to their trust, either not wanting anything to do with the character, or protecting that character to the point of putting his own safety at risk. Due to Eustace's short-term monetary greed, Courage puts his safety on the line against the government and scientists who would much rather poke and experiment at the oddity. It is then when we see Courage at his most courageous, being able to put his safety in the hands of a stranger that he only just started to trust. The episode can be quite beautiful and also quite dark at the same time. showing how low greed can make someone look and how beautiful life can be if we just let it blossom by itself. Now, because of Courage's compassion, the Star Makers are able to live on for another generation, creating the stars that Courage would look up upon.
Ah, Courage, you're part of the miracle of birth, you are.
Courage is a strong, well-rounded character who, while surface-level cowardice may indicate a predictable formula, his character serves as a great vehicle to bring the deeper concepts out of the characters around him. It's his perceived predictability that wields fresh and invigorating dynamics and relationships with the beings around him. He's way more than a stupid dog.
Oh, hey, your toast is soggy. I feel so naughty.
It's a start.
Muriel Bag is the Deuterogonus of the series. She's everything from the warm, grandmotherly figure to the damsel in distress to the woman who's not afraid to bonk Eustace over the head when he goes too far with Courage. She's a sweet, Scottish, devoted housewife who generally cooks, cleans, and participates in knitting, making tea, and relaxing in her rocking chair with Courage. Stretch Films, the production company that Dilworth had taken out to produce Courage and for tax purposes, reached out to a potential voice actor, Andy White, but upon calling the household, Thea White would pick up. When approached if she knew anyone who could play the role, she said, "I don't know anyone, but I used to be an actress, and my husband is a Scot, and I could do the accent, so why don't I audition?" She's described as the nurturing maternal figure, and provides a contrast to Eustace's outlook on life, and the various situations that can happen within the show. She's very hospitable and warm, and oftentimes can be protective of what Courage perceives as an enemy. Whereas Eustace sold out Bigfoot in Courage Meets Bigfoot, Muriel was offering the same monster pie. She'd also be very receptive to the space squid in Last of the Star Makers, putting her own life and safety at risk to protect it from the government before she got arrested. However, a very special episode that dives into the aspect of being nice to her perceived enemies is the season 1 episode titled "The Gods Must Be Goosey." A goose that does not live with the quote mortals is seen wooing from afar. He takes a trip down to nowhere and decides to wed Muriel right in front of her house.
Oh, that's sweet. But I'm spoken for. But thank you. I've never had an endless field of flowers before.
She'd be wowed and prioritized by this goose throughout the episode, and still after all of the nice things that he would do, she'd remain loyal and state that she's spoken for. Meanwhile, within the same episode, Eustace is more worried about his car, and also legitimately cries at the end of it when it gets taken away, stating that he's nothing without his truck. This would not be the only time that Muriel would be approached to be wed, even against her will. There's also the episode referenced earlier, Bride of Swamp Monster, where said titular character rampages around nowhere trying to find who he perceives to be his swamp woman, and thus confuses it with Muriel, who is abducted right in front of Eustace to be wed. It would also happen in the season 3 episode Mondo Magic. She'd be converted by a magician out of malice to be wed.
By midnight tonight, the transformation will be complete, and I shall take her as my bride.
Oh, Courage!
In a way, it's kind of creepy to see such a pattern within villains, however not illogical. In the town of nowhere, we see that the citizens are pretty cold, uninteresting, and ugly. So Muriel stands out in a way that even the villains can understand. Even through all of this, from the threats to the constant compliments, she'd remain loyal to Eustace through thick and thin. In fact, if anything, she remains quite supportive of the efforts he gives throughout the house and yard.
Well, it's not a royal hen house, but it is quite lovely. Come, Courage, let's go in and have a look-see. Eustace, you did a fine job.
However, it is not only Eustace and Courage who she's supportive of, but also anyone who comes her way and presents no obvious signs of aggression. In the season 3 episode, Night of the Scarecrow, we see this in full form. Upon suing a scarecrow back to being a full being, the episode explores the struggle of said scarecrow, gaining the ability to actually scare and not be torn up by said crows. Muriel offers a great supporting role within the episode, providing encouragement to the scarecrow to pursue his passion. Towards the beginning of the episode, it's shown that Courage accidentally being scary is more scary than the scarecrow intentionally trying to be scary, like with the snake.
Thank you, Courage. Now, I don't want you worrying about frightening things on my account.
In this episode, he'd start off as a bad guy, be nursed back to help being perceived as a good guy, turn on the family in order to quote protect Muriel as a bad guy going too far, and end the episode as a good guy, following his non-Scarecrow dreams. Although he flops a lot within the episode and that may be confusing to a new audience, rest assured that Muriel stays rather consistent, taking up the role that Courage generally does as a therapist within the episode. After the Scarecrow nearly runs over Courage and the crew, he gets torn up by the same crows that were unafraid of him, thus incapacitating him once more.
My father was a scary scarecrow, and his father, and his Aunt Hilda. Oh, but me, I'm a worthless bale of nothing.
Just because you come from a scary family doesn't mean you have to be scary too.
However, in addition to becoming the comforting voice within the show, Muriel can also be the damsel in distress, and this is a role that she plays often. You can see this in the visually stunning episode, Hard Drive Courage. As helpful as Muriel can be in certain situations, she's not technologically sound exactly, and thus after pressing the wrong key on a virus-ridden computer, she's then transferred into the computer to complete the computer's motherboard. It doesn't make much sense, but neither did Space Whales and Last of the Star Makers, so I'm not complaining there. She's then trapped in the computer for Courage to rescue. She'd also need rescuing in Mega Muriel the Magnificent, which while granted was the computer in Muriel's body, it was her body on the line. She'd need rescuing in Bride of Swamp Monster, as stated before. She'd also need rescuing in the Magic Tree of Nowhere, which had the tree grant Eustace's offhand remark about Muriel growing a giant infecting head. There's also the multitude of times that she would need rescuing from more of the prolific villains within the show. However, that's for a later section. Another defining episode involving Muriel is the episode titled Little Muriel. In this episode, she'd be whisked away in a tornado that ages her down, and we learned that she wasn't always the nice, kind, sweet, and quiet woman that she'd aged to be. In fact, a young Muriel was quite rude, loud, and hyper.
You'll be home soon, Muriel.
I want to go to the candy store. I want to buy a toy. I want to watch TV. I want to go to the zoo. I want to go swimming. I want a new doll. I want a new front tooth. I want a tea party. I want a party dress.
I know I'm not gonna like this.
It places Courage as the parental unit here, as Eustace is forever knocked out by the various wreckages around the destroyed home. The episode is very hyperactive considering the lack of an antagonist and pays homage to a new Looney Tunes episode titled Best Bugs, with this macaroni and cheese scene.
More cheese! More cheese and macaroni! Too much macaroni! Ooh, perfect! I hate macaroni and cheese.
Aside from the major aspects of her character, she has a running gag about showing her undergarments and using vinegar in cooking, especially in places that don't require it. One such example of the latter is in Shirley the Medium.
What do you think of that, Courage? You're right, too much vinegar.
Another example of such is in the previously mentioned episode, Hard Drive Courage, in which an extremely sick Eustace is offered multiple different home remedies, one of which is a gelatin which has vinegar in it.
No! What's in there anyway?
Oh, just a wee drop of vinegar.
She'd also continue this pattern in Invisible Muriel when interrogated by the government, and Tulip's Worm, a very weird episode involving an alien worm. Speaking of Tulip's Worm, it was also a great episode that displayed Muriel's lack of knowing the concept of being mean. Like with the first clip that introduced the Muriel segment from Angry Nasty People here, she doesn't react well to danger in her face and always assumes the people around her to not resort to violence, even when they have a weapon. For example, within Tulip's Worm, these two bear characters approach their home and want the location of the worm that Courage originally was playing brass for.
So, tell us where the worm is, or fry!
I must say, you aren't very polite.
Tell us where the worm is, or fry! please?
Muriel provides a quintessential role within the show as the motherly, warm, and kind-hearted counterpoint to Courage's fear and Eustace's cynicism. All three work together in harmony to provide an excellent performance and dynamic between them. Muriel may be one of the sweetest characters in animation as a whole because of her sheer hospitality, optimism, and caregiving habits.
Oh, Eustace, I'm sorry for the terrible things I've said.
That's okay, Muriel. Nobody's perfect.
I wonder where Courage has run off to.
Who cares?
Eustace Bagg is the tritagonist of the series, initially voiced by Howard Hoffman in the pilot, but later Lionel G. Wilson, who unfortunately passed away during production of the show, but was later picked up by Arthur Anderson. He was a farmer who can't grow anything, living in the middle of nowhere with Muriel and her dog Courage. His personality was based on an earlier version of the creator in what he described as an incorrigible attitude. He's often seen tormenting Courage by either scaring him with his trademark mask or putting him down in any way that he sees fit. Like with Courage, Eustace is also based off of an earlier character of Dilworth's work. Originating as Malcolm from Smart Talk with Raisin, he's described as the remote and rancorous brute. Due to the no gore rule of John and the Cartoon Network executives, this has led into a major change of Eustace using a scary mask instead of a shotgun. He'd state in a Sci-Fi Wire article that, quote, "The network's comments were basically around no gore, which I'm not a fan of, and I've never been. In fact, I can't even watch gory movies," end quote. If you've seen Eustace within the show, he's generally described as cynical, jaded, easily irritable, ungrateful, and fueled by monetary gain. In Courage Meets Bigfoot, it was him who brought the mob to Bigfoot to get a lifetime membership, as vague as that sounds. In Last of the Star Makers, it was him who brought the government and the scientists to experiment on said space squid. However, the whole goes deeper in on his selfishness. There's a season 2 episode entitled The Magic Tree of Nowhere, where after Courage plants a tree, because of the appreciation Muriel has for the tree, Eustace now doesn't like the tree. And we'll see more of this specific envy in episodes such as Bride of Swamp Monster, where in the very beginning, because Muriel put a photo of herself and Courage on one side of the locket, it was worthless. But when Muriel put a photo of Eustace on the other side of the locket, then it was half worthless, suggesting that he's envious of the amount of love that Courage gets.
Oh my, Courage, did you do this?
I've never grown anything, not even weeds. But that stupid dog can grow trees.
This leads into Eustace acting cruel without thinking of the emotions of others. However, not exactly for monetary gain all the time, but also envy.
Don't you harm this tree!
I'm taking it down, Muriel. Get out of the way!
Where are your marbles? We need this tree, Eustace. It's providing for us.
But that's my job. Rotten tree.
Eustace shows within this episode a lack of admittance of wanting to be the sole provider for the family, however having a deep-rooted insecurity about his own self-worth. It is explored a tiny bit more within the season. We have Eustace also being equally stubborn to Muriel in the season 4 episode Muted Muriel. In this episode, the duo have a full-blown argument, which is uncommon within the show. That leads into Muriel giving Eustace and Courage the silent treatment, and because of this, for some reason a giant starfish is coming to destroy the house. While it's a very shaky episode on premise, we have Eustace saying things point blank as, "I don't care what you think," or that he doesn't care if Muriel thinks that he's being selfish and nasty. It's moments like this that really push Eustace into being the antagonist of the episode sometimes, generally with Courage being the one who has to mend things between the two. In fact, going back to the Magic Tree of Nowhere once more, we see that during the middle of the episode, a full-blown war between a defensive Courage and an offensive Eustace happened. The people around him don't just roll over and allow him to do so. Going back to that same Sci-Fi article, it reads, "I'm very much interested in the repressed traumas of villains, even a protagonist. I have stitched together a vague history of Eustace, that he was unloved by his mother. She preferred an older brother, and there was an effect of that in Eustace. I've explored that in a few cartoons." In fact, within the episode Mother's Day, we get a deeper look at the history of Eustace and his mother.
Don't put your head down. Don't eat too fast. Put your socks up. Don't slouch. Sit up. Why can't you be more civilized? Like Courage.
No.
It's later learned within that episode, in particular, that Eustace's mother has a very warm opinion on Courage, and a cold opinion on Eustace, her own son. Even though within other episodes such as McPherson Phantom and Bad Hair Day, she'd serve as the main antagonist towards Courage, she'd never seem to keep a steady opinion on if she enjoys Courage's company, or if she thinks that he's a waste of space. Like the article stated, there is a vague history of Eustace and his brother that is explored in episodes such as Shirley the Medium and Farmer Hunter, Farmer Hunted. However, within this episode, Mother's Day, Eustace takes out his frustrations on Courage, unintentionally hogging up all the affection and love from Eustace's mother. It is later learned that after Eustace finally stands up to his mother, after a sabotage gone wrong, Eustace's mother is seen without her hair, revealing it to be a wig, which causes her to break down and call herself ugly.
How could you love a mother who has no hair?
No, Ma. You always look good to me.
I did. Thank you, son.
However, not all of his motivations are out of envy. Sometimes he can be generally mean to Courage just because it's convenient. In the episode Angry Nasty People, a villain who takes the role of an exploitive supernatural TV executive pushes towards Eustace to be cruel for a television show that he's producing. This leads into Eustace very naturally and without any type of resistance or restraint to insult Courage and be super mean to everyone and everything. He may mask it as doing it for monetary gain, however it's natural to him. He was naturally cruel within the beginning of that episode, before any deal, before any TV show was known about, which indicates a comfort with his level of cruelty. He's shown not to care about the potential consequences of his monetary greed in episodes such as Shirley the Medium and Invisible Muriel, wherein both sides, Courage was shown to tell Eustace to not act on impulse and do the right thing, and he did not listen to him.
Secret invisibility testing. Good deal. Secret gold storage. Works for me.
This was about Eustace rescuing an invisible Muriel who was being tested for suspicions on holding a gem that was lightly protected by the government. Rather than saving his wife by also going invisible, he decided to check out the gold storage, which led into Courage saving Muriel by himself. In fact, speaking of both Shirley the Medium and the Curse of Shirley, he's shown to be called the Stupid One by Shirley, alongside how Eustace's mother calls him Stupid Boy, which he passed down to Courage in the form of calling him Stupid Dog.
The stupid one. He's stupid, right?
However, this would be one of the defining moments of Eustace as a character. Within this episode, we see one of the tiny shreds of niceness still not beaten out of Eustace. He's given a curse for being selfish, not willing to give anything to Shirley earlier within that episode. He begins to have a dark cloud over his head, lose his vision, and grow mushrooms all over his body. Throughout the entire curse period within the episode, he's shown to power through it all, pretending as if there's no such things as curses, and in fact, still being mean throughout the entire process.
Excuse me, sir, but would you please help me across the street?
You got legs, don't you? Help yourself.
Through this, he begins to target anyone and anything that looks even a tiny bit suspicious through his blurred vision, leading him to be viewed as extremely paranoid and trigger happy. However, towards the end, we see that Courage brings a busted mirror accidentally, that Eustace doesn't perceive as Courage, but a younger version of himself, who is sad because he doesn't have a hat to protect his hot head.
No hat? Oh, no hat. Oh, that's not right. Little boy should have a hat.
Oh, Courage! You did the impossible. You got Eustace to give of himself.
It's a very small but significant peek into the nicer side of Eustace. He gives, which even Muriel, as oblivious as she could be, acknowledges as rare. As much as I can go into the detail of Eustace's shortcomings and negative actions, there's a reason why he works alongside the trio. He offers a different perspective that allows for physical comedy, introspection, and even the voice of reason in some occasions. He may be bald, bold, bitter, and brash, But he's our Eustace. It would not be a proper rise and fall video if I did not get into the aspects that people enjoy in a show. For Courage, those are the villains. With respect to time and getting this out properly, I want to highlight my top 6 personal favorite villains. However, Courage had a large amount of villains, each with their own personality, backstory, and performance, and would definitely make this video twice as long as it needs to be. So I'd like to dedicate a video to just that aspect in the future. However, let's get on to number 7. Yes, 7 in my top 6 because it's quite brief. In season 4, we had a villain called Mad Dog in the episode The Mask. I cover it in detail there, but that villain was one of the most realistic, and thus a lot of people really felt the danger and fear whenever this villain was on the screen. I'd recommend checking out The Mask once you finish this video alongside my review. The first villain I'd like to note is the Weremole. It appears in the episode Night of the Weremole, a season 1 episode. As Muriel tends to her garden, we see a rabbit nearby get swallowed up by the earth. As this happens and Muriel goes to investigate, her hand gets bitten by said Weremole. She ends up getting infected quite quickly, and while the doctor says that there won't be any swelling, we'd see that other actions start to happen. It is the transformation of Muriel that gives the Weremole such power. It'd take Courage dressing up as a rabbit to disguise as prey and get shredded before Courage can get what he desired. This villain would be one of the first, but be a homage to the trope of werewolves and other animals that are basically a more aggressive and supernatural version of themselves. They'd play around with the horror trope of not showing Muriel's face, but zooming in on her watching TV in anticipation. It is that, alongside this villain being very volatile, that I ended up remembering it so fondly. Then there is Big Toe, the second villain I'd like to note. The episode surrounding their appearance, The Clutching Foot, starts off with Eustace having an itchy foot fungus. We'd see that over the course of the episode it grows larger with Eustace not wanting to go to the doctor and none of Muriel's home remedies working. After a nap, his once purple foot is now consuming almost 3/4 of his own body before fully completing the transformation. We see that Big Toe is just the biggest toe of a 5-toed gangster fungus. The toe is based on gangsters in 30s movies and have similar motivations.
We're gonna pull a heist, see? Yeah, a heist. It's Sunday and the banks are closed, so we knock over a bank, see?
You would see that Big Toe would want to rob a bank, with the hostage and a getaway driver being Muriel and Courage respectively. He'd also give Muriel the nickname Fat Lady. Big Toe would be very persuasive, using Courage's love for Muriel against him, by making him do the dirty work during heist. They do a bank robbery, a cargo train robbery, but neither of them seem to connect. Courage was able to take out this villain using his own tongue. However, the villain transferred over to him, a very fun but also unique villain compared to the rest. Then there was Katz, who appeared in multiple episodes throughout the series. He's known for his rather calm demeanor, smooth talking, and calm British accent. He's considered pure evil within the series and has a distinct theme song. He's known for the phrase,
"A little sport before dying, dear boy,"
which he used in A Night at the Cat's Motel, and also Cat's Candy. Covering the gist of the former as I already covered it, Katz showed incredible disdain for dogs but seemed to play fair. However, in the latter, he's shown to have battles with Eustace, like in Club Cats, which indicates that a rivalry could have been formed. He's the only villain to appear in every season and would technically be the first antagonist to appear on the show. He's inspired by James Mason, according to Paul Chauffleur, the voice actor for Cats, Le Quack, Big Toe, Nowhere Newsman, among a multitude of others. Katz is a con artist and only looks out for his own personal gain. He can show absolutely no regard to others, and some have even referred to Katz as a psychopath. There's also the Spirit of the Harvest Moon. Quite the intimidating figure he is. The Spirit of the Harvest Moon is a live-action head that takes stock of what grows around his land. Since Muriel and Eustace have not grown a single thing in the House of Discontent, the spirit warns Muriel and Eustace to get out of there or suffer the consequences.
On this night of the harvest moon, when all that grows from the soil is celebrated and offerings are made, you have nothing.
Lousy soil!
It's not the soil. Because you don't respect your land, you must leave it.
Eustace too, stubborn to admit that he can't grow anything, nearly gets himself and Muriel killed when said consequences involve pretty much melting them alive. It was Courage's extensive work on the flower, alongside Eustace's sweat that grew the flower, and thus lifted the near curse. I love how this episode plays around with the idea of a haunted house, which is one of the many facets of horror that the show pays homage to. The idea at the time must have been pretty difficult to implement, however it has paid off, as some consider this antagonist to be one of the scariest of them all. He's so iconic he'd also appear in the Powerpuff Girls Super Smash Up comics as a cameo. This would be no less without talking about Fred. So let's look at an interview of what the creator said.
Freaky Fred was a sort of a pregnancy between my head writer David Stephen Cohen and I. And I was always in love with Dr. Seuss, and I wanted to make a cartoon that had rhyme in the whole thing. And David, of course, was in head deep with Dr. Seuss on some other projects, and it was like it just happened. It was wonderful, and of course working with my writing team. You know, because I reproduced the Termite Terrace writings model. We're getting all these, you know, very weird and strange writers, you know, personalities, and we would just smash up a premise until it fleshed itself out. It was so much fun. It was like we're nonstop laughing.
He's related to Muriel and speaks in rhymes, so you'll hear it in the episode all the time. He's known for such a wicked expression, a smile so wide. His creepiness makes even Eustace want to hide. Apparently his occupation is cutting hair, but in Freaky Fred, he gives Courage quite the scare.
Alone was I with tender courage, and all his fur, his furry footage, which I say did encourage me to be quite naughty.
Apparently he had a pet, and quite a mission he had set, for when his trimmers and hamster met, he got naughty. This would be a memorable guy. On villains tier list, he'd rank quite high, and though in the end he says goodbye, he was pretty naughty. He'd shave Courage but not be rough, which for Courage must have been tough, as the bathroom door was pretty much shut, and he'd be, well, you know. Freaky Fred is one of the best, so I had to format this section unlike the rest. However, I must bring up our next guest, so let's never forget Fred's quest. Also, Fred's music was amazing. This list would be incomplete without talking about King Ramses, one of the few characters that was animated in full CGI. His appearance is both monumental and legendary. He's considered to be one of the scariest characters in the show, alongside the spirit of the Harvest Moon, and a being from the finale that we'll get to. Voiced by John R. Dilworth himself, and being one of his favorite episodes, he describes the appearance as so. I had just returned from traveling through Egypt and sailing the Nile and absorbing that immense culture and mythology. I couldn't help but be affected by it, so I wanted my version of it or a version of it. Dilworth tells Sci-Fi Wire, I asked my brother, Jim P. Dilworth, who was a designer and a fine artist. He's now with the pharaohs somewhere in their golden boat, to design me a Ramses, and he did. I love this drawing so much. I didn't want to hand draw it. I wanted to do something else with it. We'd see grave robbers attempt to steal a stone slab from the tomb of King Ramses, while the cops pursue. Courage would end up finding the slab and bringing it to the farmhouse. Eustace would end up keeping the stone slab in exchange for money, and that is when we get to one of the most memorable parts of the show.
Return the slab.
What?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
What's your offer?
We'd see that King Ramses controls plagues, the first being water, the second being a record player playing a loud song, and the third being the locusts. Eustace would be Eustace and only given when they're moments away from death. King Ramses would be one of the most popular villains from the series, and show how greedy Eustace can be. But with all the villains out of the way, let's get on with The Fall.
Courage just, we fulfilled our contractual obligation for 104 cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And they, you know, Cartoon Network felt like they didn't need any more. I mean, I guess we could have done a 5th or 6th season. I mean, that would have been great, but we were also eager to develop a new show with them. But everything changed at that time. Linda Saminsky left, a whole new management moved in, I mean, it's like the world just got turned over. It was like a waffle maker. You know, you pour the batter in, close it, but then you got to flip it over. I mean, it's like, what's going on there?
Not every Rise and Fall video will tackle a show that got problematic within a certain season, or was tragically cut off too early. For every Danny Phantom and Harvey Beaks that I may cover, there's also a Fishhooks and Courage the Cowardly Dog. Sometimes the fall is that. Well, it ends. It ends because the creator has fulfilled their contract and Cartoon Network does not want to negotiate for another. However, from looking at the show, it definitely did not end too early, as it was able to explore different mediums, tell impactful stories, and flesh out characters that we'd remember for decades to come. As the last season has episodes such as The Mask, The Last of the Star Makers, and Remembrance of Courage's Past, which were some of its best episodes. The show ended at a good time. It did not overstay its welcome to get bad, and it did not end before it got really good. It's made an impact, and we have plenty of material to come. However, that doesn't mean a fall per se is non-existent. A common misconception with the fall and the Rise and Fall series that I do is that it has to be around ratings performance. However, there's much more to animation and shows than that. Sometimes it could be in the form of a bad episode, a bad pattern, or an unfortunate industry.
There's something wrong here!
With the success of Courage the Cowardly Dog and its high performance in Cartoon Fridays, a scheduling block that occurred in the 7 to 11 p.m. time slot back in the 2000s, led to other inclusions of our pink mutt, such as the October 2000s block, Scarathon, co-led by Scooby-Doo. There was also Cartoon Summer, where for the entire summer's rating period, Cartoon Network tied for second place among ad-supported cable networks. Courage during this time would deliver its best ever ratings. So with the Cartoon Summer ending in 2001, we end season 2 with a 22-minute long special, The Tower of Dr. Jalos. It starts with a cannon shooting into the purple sky, creating explosions among a town with an unenthused character staring on in the distance. You can see that they wanted to go with something a bit more cinematic to open up this episode, considering its longer time frame. We see that these cannons don't necessarily cause destruction, but unhappiness, and we learn more about its source.
You already know my reputation. I am Dr. Jalos.
I love the music composition here, which feels very rich and epic, given the choir in the background, but also very cartoonish with its lead instruments. The story also has a great structure, showing both the destruction of the city and why this specific city is being targeted for destruction. We see that Dr. Jalos went to City Hall for funding, and was not only denied but laughed out of the room and kicked out pretty harshly. The mayor in this instance plays the typical politician role, not caring for the people and not willing to help out the little guy. It is then we see this CGI tower, which I can tell how it separates from the 2D assets easily, most likely would have been an incredible feat to see back in 2001. Putting on my double-decade-old glasses, I think it looks amazing, especially with this rolling ground effect. As it slowly rises upon the town of nowhere, we see that all the Doc wants to do is make people unhappy, and he becomes happy off of their unhappiness. We see that this doesn't affect only the citizens, but the police force, the mailmen, and the news team. Although Eustace would be pretty upset about his paper, it'd be hard to discern what's going on yet. Muriel also shows that she still uses vinegar in all of her recipes, but this time Courage likes it, unlike the other times. It's actually a little inconsistent, however that could be hand-waved with what exactly the vinegar is going into.
The city of nowhere fell under attack from an unknown tower. But right now, I feel like going to bed. So that's all the news for today.
Eustace would go off to get his paper despite Muriel worrying about his safety. We'd also see a cameo of Dilworth alongside others on the TV within the episode. It's a pretty cool sight to see, and would have gone over many of our heads growing up. Dr. Jalos would begin to have a moment of introspection very early within the episode, stating that even with all of the money in the world, eating ice cream in bed, and a giant TV, he is still unhappy. And if he can't be happy, then the people around him can't be happy. It's stated on the wiki that in some way or form, this may be referencing depression, whether from experience of the creator or in general, or even with Dr. Jalos' character. He tried to get some happiness from his rat companion, but he would receive little to none. After Eustace honks his horn at the tower as they are standing in the middle of the road, he inadvertently leads them to his home, which is far away from the town. This is when we learn that Muriel also gets attacked and is converted into the unhappy, miserable version of herself. Eustace is immune, building off his lack of emotions. I suppose the episode is trying to say that he's already naturally this way, so any unhappy canon would be pretty redundant. Courage, however, is most likely not immune, and has to somehow reverse the process on Muriel. So weirdly enough, unlike other episodes, Courage sits down and devises a plan, which seems pretty specific for someone who shouldn't know what the outcome is. He's so sure of the tower and what's in it, he has devised a very specific plan. It seems unlike the other episodes, and unlike Courage to simply sit down and meditate on the correct strategy. I think prime Courage is him going in only when the stakes are high enough and bumping into the right choice. Now, after Eustace said he wouldn't be in on the plan, he's somehow in on the plan, which again seems very specific to work so easily. The episode tries to tell me that once the pizza is in the hands of the rat, he's going to have a specific table to set it down and leave it be. Normal people totally don't bring pizza into a place where they don't open it and leave it in one spot. Again, seems very convenient with a special that has twice the time and thus can flesh out these very plot force elements. Speaking of forced plot elements, when the cannon hits the rat, he doesn't become unhappy and tired, but rather aggressive and stronger, which leads into Courage once again, thinking of the right thing at the right time.
My happy plums will make anything happy.
Oddly, this doesn't revert the rat, but rather transforms the rat once more into a baby. He then ends up in a fight with Dr. Gelos. However, it's a very underwhelming fight. It does retain to its core of what makes Courage in a sense, by having a cartoonish battle, in this case Hangman, but where I found this to be infuriatingly dumb, whereas others ingenious, is unlike the racquetball with cats or dancing with Bigfoot, not only is Hangman a very slow game, but they stop in the middle of it to have Courage argue over getting proper change as he bought a vowel for $5, and I guess he gave him 20, and because there were two of the same vowels, he got swindled out of $10 instead of $5 because even though you're buying one vowel for $5, he apparently counts it as 2. It seems very convoluted for a character who doesn't speak. He had to get out of the rope to do this, and it's not like I haven't seen a gag of captured victim for cartoony purposes leaves their trap but then gets back in, as the episode has kept it largely serious until now. It feels very unfitting, and they missed the mark on this episode when it came to that level of antics. He's also shown to teleport. Yes, because he was clearly firing the cannon and walking up the stairs at the same time. No, you needed this part to work with the next part so that it leads in well, which involves Courage being hoisted over the unhappiness concoction. However, with the addition of a small amount of happy plums, the mixture goes wild, shooting everywhere in an emotional confusion. They slowly show that this happiness cannon is reverting the effects of the town. However, Courage takes one and heads back into the house. It leads into a scene that had some emotional potential. Courage has one of the last happiness cannonballs, and Dr. Gelos has a ball that turns someone into stone. It could have shown a sacrifice or literally anything compelling, but the episode defaults into throwing Eustace into the mix, who gets hit with the stone ball, and Muriel is healed. Although a little dazed, Courage and her end up witnessing Dr. Gelos eat the happy plums himself, which leads into him being happy for the first time. That's how it all ends. To me, the special didn't build up the character well, nor did it have a great payoff. Unlike the mask, the Tower of Dr. Gelos represents one of the worst offerings of Courage, which is a small list, but a list nonetheless. Would Courage be able to live on? What would it take? Here's an excerpt from an interview. Well, humans have a tremendous capacity to hope. I have written so often on this. There is no corporate economic rationale to make any new episodes. I've read that there have been petitions signed by many fans that never even got to Cartoon Network Maybe a campaign of a substantial nature of this kind that actually got to an exec would be a provocation. However, the lack of courage by the merchandiser still remain. Pink or fuchsia dogs will not sell in a boy-dominated marketplace. This is rather complex, but the undercurrent of conservatism in America is strong and easy to intolerance. It comes back to marketing. There's many ways to make money off of animation, putting their rate of success to the side. But one way is through merchandising. While the majority of us would be interested in a Courage plushie or action figure of the villains, you have to cut out a large majority of potential buyers, as not every fan is going to buy merch. And then you would also have to consider with such an early show, it's only going to appeal to people my age in their early to mid 20s, at least with buying merch. Not only that, but look at the landscape now. How many shows are on now that is mean, but we enjoy it? How many shows can get away with having truly messed up backgrounds for some of these characters? Even the creator is surprised with how much they were able to get past the censors. Courage would have a hard time surviving in this landscape. Although it stood out even by early 2000s standards, the other shows around it were not afraid to get mean, gross, and sometimes messed up. And that's something that Cartoon Network has lost. Shows are happier now, or deeper, and they have more happy endings, and less disturbance. With what little that did try, it was harshly criticized and tossed aside. They have to go with what makes money, especially in an industry that relies on an incredible amount of revenue streams for a single show to do well. Perfect. That leaves us with the last half of the last episode, the sister episode to Remembrance of Courage Past. It's the series finale, Perfect. Considered by many to be the most unsettling and darkest episode of the series due to its subject matter, it starts out, as its title would suggest, showing how imperfect Courage is. He'd paint the chicken coop incorrectly, fix the windmill wrong, and be too wrapped up in his own head that he'd also mess up replacing the tire on Eustace's truck.
You can't do nothing right, you amateur. You ought to go to right thing doing school. Someone who'll make you perfect.
It's then when the episode would also show Courage messing things up on Muriel's side as well. He'd be approached to make a dish that Muriel has never tried before, and mess up the ingredients and the table. With Courage not really saying much, we can only imagine how Courage feels, but his self-esteem is depleting by the minute. Sure, Eustace yelling at Courage is nothing new, but I'm sure his scolding didn't help. Also, even though Muriel didn't yell at Courage or scold him, it was the disappointment he had for himself that weighed down upon him. It is then when we meet the worst monster of them all, the Perfectionist. The Perfectionist will never be seen by anyone but Courage in this episode, which implies that Courage may have created her. The Perfectionist wastes no time in shaming Courage for all of his imperfections, and tries to straighten him out. She tried to get him to walk perfectly, and he'd fail. She tried to get him to talk perfectly, and obviously he fails. She then tried to get him to craft perfectly, and on top of failing, we get a very crucial scene towards this episode.
Look at the work of another of my pupils, a perfect pupil.
This scene shows us that no matter what way Courage would have shaped those toothpicks and glue, that the standards that the Perfectionist would have had would never be enough, as the standards are unreasonable, as perfectionism always is. Each time Courage fails a task, you see his reaction, whimpering, getting teary-eyed, and wondering about his self-worth. The battle of perfectionism doesn't scare him, but rather gives him a sense of dread, which is a different monster in the fear bubble altogether. Courage would get multiple nightmares as he attempts to sleep perfectly. The most notable one is the Bugle Monster, also known as the blue creature from Perfect if you know it that way. This is supposed to represent Eustace's bugle, which is a clever way to incorporate it. It's known for not being perfect and having an off-key sound. Eustace would never fix the bugle, which means that it remains perfect. Its uncanny stature, monochromatic mock-up, and dead eyes give it a very eerie appearance. Top that with its words being drenched in ever-expanding reverb, and you have what many consider to be one of the scariest creatures of the show. Courage then dreams about the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz of all throwbacks, showing that they all have shortcomings and are being viewed by a fourth version of Courage playing the Wicked Witch of the West. The animation looks simple but effective and may have been done in Flash or an equivalent. The third nightmare revolves around these images falling from the sky. They zip past before revealing a final note, which has the words "right now" cryptically placed on the image. Unlike the last two, the sky here looks genuine and may be CGI on top of a real-life sky. In addition, unlike the first one, which seemed to represent sadness, and the second one, which to me represents shortcomings, this is the most cryptic yet. Maybe it has to do with his own crafting skills. The figure at the end seems rather angelic, so maybe it has to do with Courage turning into an angel now, if you get what I mean. He wants to be a part of the sky in a sense. I'm not exactly sure. The fourth nightmare seems to be about his talents and people's reactions to them. As he juggles pies, the people in the crowd laugh, which leads into him failing, having pie all over his face. It seems like a truly embarrassing experience. This scene was animated using a combination of CGI for the audience and stop motion for Courage. If you listen closely, the music goes in reverse and switches, creating this very dissonant feel. In addition to being rightfully kicked out this time, this fifth nightmare seems to stem from disappointment. Muriel trusts Courage with what seems to be an important vase. Courage would drop it, but rather than the vase breaking, Muriel breaks, which can mean a variety of things. It can mean that while the vase can always be replaced, the trust and respect that Muriel has for Courage may be shattered. It could also mean that Courage fears messing up in a way that Muriel may not be able to get over so easily, thus breaking her whenever he breaks something that truly matters. Courage would get barely any sleep, which would show in his eyes. There would be a surprise final exam, which if Courage fails, everyone would know that he's imperfect. He'd take this opportunity to take a breather in the bathroom, in which we get the most important scene of them all.
There's no such thing as perfect. Huh? You're beautiful as you are, Courage. With all your imperfections, you can do anything.
Even from one of the more unsettling sources, the message rings true. Courage is imperfect. He won't do much well, but he'll be loved anyway. The same goes for Eustace and Muriel. It is their imperfections that they accept, and Courage among Eustace and Muriel would love each other regardless. Look how happy Muriel is in messing up her dish, or Eustace is when it comes to creating a band out of broken instruments. They are taking the unexpected bad outcomes and turning them into new opportunities to express themselves and enjoy life, rather than wallowing in the what if. Courage needed this. Courage needed to hear and see other people around him not being perfect either, but not getting so caught up in it. Perfectionism is an unattainable climb because it can always get higher. You can always be a little more quicker, smarter, tougher, etc. These videos can always get better. I can always say this line a little bit better, but when is it good enough? Perfectionism doesn't have an answer for that. When Courage ends up taking the test, he's tasked to make a number 6. He makes it the way that he feels like it should be done, which upsets the perfectionist more than anything else, as shown by her actually breaking the ruler. She'd end up ranting, melting in a puddle of her own frustration and unattainable standards, as the chalkboard turns into dust, taking the place of where the computer once did. It'd show Eustace very happy, which is uncommon, playing with his broken bugle. It'd also show Muriel being very happy with what she made, and Courage no longer dwelling in his mistakes, and finally being happy and making the best of their situation. That is how the episode ends, and that's how the show would end. This episode aired November 2nd, 2002. Since then, the series has had no further developments, until around 2012. There was a special announced by BuzzFeed titled The Fog of Courage. The special was produced as a possible pilot for a CGI revival of Courage. It's about 8 minutes, and it's only really aired on Southern Eastern, Asian, and Indian Cartoon Network channels. It follows Courage finding a mysterious amulet and a ghostly fog covering the farm. Courage then has to protect his family from a vengeful fog spirit named Clyde, the Fog Spirit. Dilworth would tweet in 2014 that he's in the writing process of 2 synopses for 2 half-hour Courage specials for 2015. However, nothing would come from those. Dilworth would comment under a now-deleted Facebook post about being in negotiations with Boomerang over a possible prequel titled Before Courage. Although the internet would be excited about this, some may have been a little too excited, as a large amount of people believed in a very viral image of the pink dog that we know. Going around in late 2018, early 2019, there was a Courage reboot photo that had a very stylized version of him. In November 2019, he states that he's still developing that prequel alongside Cartoon Network. He doesn't know where it's going or how it's developing. We all wait with bated breaths.
What have you been doing after Courage?
Living, making art, traveling, the same I've always been doing.
Dilworth would also work on other short films, and is still actively releasing new material to this day. He'd also fight heavily to get a soundtrack out of Warner Brothers and Cartoon Network, however nothing has come of it for over a decade. Although Courage would end, the show would have carved out a considerate amount of fans, and gained a cult following.
I've had a handwritten letter from a retired fighter jet pilot of the Air Force. He wrote me, told me how much he liked Courage the Cowardly Dog and my work, and asked me for autograph. He collects autographs of people he enjoys. And he sent me a picture of his jet plane. Then I would get the 7-year-old, 8-year-old that would write me letters about how the show has brought the family together. They all watched it together. So you have this huge spectrum all over the world.
Courage has inspired a generation of creators who want to create something weird, dark, and disturbing. Maybe it isn't for everyone, but the audience that it retained have loved the Cowardly Dog since. He's our stupid dog, and we're here for the ride. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to the editors and the supporters of April. And until next time, take care. Alpha out.